Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for BioStrategy Partners' Practical Knowledge Series on Customer Discovery. BioStrategy Partners is a nonprofit consortium of academic medical centers and research institutes committed to the development and transfer of academic research into the marketplace. We develop and offer programs and services to foster industry-academic collaboration, aid in technology development and commercialization, and contribute to the ongoing education of faculty and graduate students about the commercialization and technology transfer process. I would like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, MVM Associates, who can address all your tax credit needs, and also to our host, Penn State College of Medicine. Without you, the Practical Knowledge Series would not be possible. Turning our attention to today's topic, customer discovery, I would like to take a moment to introduce our panel. Annie Hughes is the director of the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Penn State Harrisburg. Igor Shamus is the COO and founder of Advanced Plasma Solutions in Amptech. Julie Stapleton Carroll is the program director of Blackstone Launchpad at Temple University. And I am Erica Swift, the associate director of the Center for Medical Innovation at Penn State College of Medicine, and I will be your moderator for today. Before we dive into the questions we received from the audience during the registration process, I wanted to set the stage for a moment. To kind of look at what is customer discovery, why is it important, and why are we starting to hear about this term inside of academia? So several years ago, the National Science Foundation, the NSF, created what was called the Innovation Cores Program, or I-Core program for short. The reason why the I-Core program was generated was because the NSF was looking at the $7 billion they invest in research each year. And also the National Institute for Health, the NIH, even surpassed them by investing $30 billion in research every single year. With this significant investment, the NSF and the NIH started to ask, we are investing all of this money in research, but is it having a positive economic and social impact? Is this research actually getting translated and impacting and improving our society? So they really started to look closely on what was needed to support research translation and commercialization. And what they found is it was actually startups. In addition, the federal government was already funding startups through their SBIR, STTR grant programs. And in fact, the federal government makes up 94% of the seed investments going into startups, making our federal government the largest accelerator of startups in the country. So the money was there, actually a lot of it. However, all this investment to advance research commercialization wasn't translating to successful startups. In fact, most of these startups failed. But why? So looking deeper at the lack of success, the NSF started asking the question, how can we impact startup success rate? To answer that question, they needed to know, why do most research startups fail? What they discovered was most research startups fail not because the research was bad, not because the product didn't work. It was because of lack of customers. There was no market for the product that was built. So looking even deeper, let's take a moment to look at the top 10 reasons why startups fail. In particular, I want you to hone in on the top 3 reasons, which make up over 85% of the failure rate. Again, it wasn't because the research is flawed or the product didn't work. Startups failed because the companies built something that nobody wanted, which drove the wrong hiring choices and also made wrong decisions on where the company focused, basically making everything become out of whack. So the NSF and the NIH created a goal to improve these odds, minimize risk, and create more winners. That is when they really dove deep into the NIH funding and found, as researchers, you have extreme passion for your work. You have deep, deep expertise that has driven you to discover and develop your science and technology. However, that passion and expertise does not mean the research can be successfully translated to the marketplace. To translate your work to the marketplace, you need another viewpoint, not from inside of academic walls, not from even the NIH's perspective, not from fellow scientific peers, but from the customer's perspective. And that is what is driving the NSF and the NIH to say, you need to get outside the academic building. You need to conduct customer discovery. And that is what's bringing us all together today. So now let's engage our panel and dive into what customer discovery actually is. Annie, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I can take that. So customer discovery is part of a four-stage process by Segway, Stanford. And it's actually part of a larger process called the Lean Startup, for which the four-stage process is actually called customer development. It's customer in front of it, right? So there's four stages in there. Customer discovery is stage one. But it's actually part of a larger Lean Startup structure in which like agile engineering is part of it, and I think business model building. Well, business model something. Building is the other part. Customer discovery. I think the focus is on discovery, right? Because the next stage is customer validation. You may at this stage. Generally, when I'm helping people at this stage, we're looking at a couple different things. We're trying to identify who our customer is, and we're trying to understand the problem that they have or the need they have. And then the end point of this stage is really a draft of a value proposition. And the value proposition is a solution to the problem. So everything needs to connect back to the customer problem or the customer need. At this stage, everything we put on paper related to that are hypotheses. This is where I'm just like, you are wrong more than you are right in this stage, and that's normal, and that's okay. You need to figure out where you're wrong. It's critical for us to figure out exactly where you're wrong in your assumptions, because those are all the holes in the boat. But when you put this up, put it in the water, it puts you at risk of sinking. The whole enterprise will sink. So really, that's what we're doing during that phase. After customer discovery comes customer validation, and that's generally where we build the MVP and then we test it. So another round of testing, another round of customer interaction happens after this first stage. So ultimately, like my background is in strategic marketing and innovation development. This is intensive market research. This is what this is. And it's discovery research at the front end. So it's, hello. I'm gonna hold it back a little bit. So it's interviews. It's all the open-ended, exploratory research methodologies that allows you to learn what you don't know. It's critical you find out all the things you don't know. What you don't know, you don't know. So that's what's happens mostly in this stage. That's all I'll say about that for now.
Well, you said a key word that I really liked, and that was hypothesis. And I think that is one thing that really makes this program that is so great that came out of the NSF and the NIH is the fact that it is hypothesis driven. Because as a researcher, you're very familiar with that and proving out your hypothesis. Well, they're doing the same thing through this customer discovery process. That you're like, okay, well, I think I have a pretty cool solution that people are going to buy. Well, that's really your hypothesis. Do they really want your solution? And so that really kicks off that validating, your hypothesis, if you will.
I can give you an example of customer discovery. We have a device, he developed it for social anxiety. So it's a device that uses vibrations for the brain that when you have an episode, you put it up behind your ear and it vibrates and it your brain waves go to a normal level. And his hypothesis was that this would be something that practitioners would want to have to prescribe to their patients. And so through the customer discovery process and talking to a number of these practitioners, he discovered that in fact they wouldn't adopt that they wanted to have that control over that person's social anxiety, that they wouldn't trust that device, that it's actually the end user who is their primary customer. So they went from a B to B to a B to C model through their customer discovery process.
And just to throw out, B2B is business to business, B2C is business to consumer. So you have a lot of industry folks here, so we'll throw out some terms. I'll try to translate.
Thank you.
And I will just add a couple words. If you talk about all different invention, I would in a couple different groups. One, it's invention that everybody needs. So you have an invention and market wants it badly without any changes. Unfortunately, it's probably like 10% of the situation when somebody or everybody wants it. Then there is another group. You have an invention, great invention, but nobody needs it. Unfortunately, this happens too. And the third group, which is pretty large group, it's an invention when nobody wants it the way how you present it, but it may be needed and actually desired if you make some changes. And this is where customer discovery becomes critical because sometimes small change or small modification or improvement can change from one group where nobody needs it to the group where everybody wants it. And we actually had a number of cases when we actually witnessed that.
Yeah, so I love that breakdown between those three different scenarios, because we do see them so often, especially that third one where you have a great product, but the way it's been developed doesn't have a market fit. And we've seen too where even here at Penn State, where we've had researchers create a great market, but who they thought was their customer isn't in fact their customer, but just shifting to a different customer set, now there was a huge market potential too. And that customer discovery process really facilitates identifying who is your right customer even. So thank you for that. So we actually received a question from the audience and through the registration was, how much customer discovery do you have to do before you start building something? Before you can actually say, okay, I know my customer. So any experience with that?
It depends on how much risk you can bear. That's the answer, I think. So if you're a very risk averse, I used to come from the Hershey company, there was a lot on the line. We had a lot of money, but we had a lot on the line in terms of embarrassment, failure. It was, it was like a dog fighting with Mars, for market share, first place there. And so there was a lot, there wasn't much risk tolerance. And so we did a lot of research. And yet, I should say this, even a big company like Hershey that kicks out, hundreds of innovation projects a year, majority of them are, I'll call them failures, in that they don't perform as expected. This is not easy. You should expect to fail. You should expect to, I think expecting that makes you then go into this process, I think primed with the right mindset. Like, I know I'm wrong, probably not, out of 100 assumptions, 95 are probably wrong. So it's my job to figure out exactly which are wrong and get on the right track. But for like my students who are going through this process, we'll look at statistical sort of guidelines, like we'll call something validated when it's, when we have maybe, if you've heard it 50 times, we'll call that reasonable validation for now, and then you can do a quantitative measure later and really feel sure. And then in some situations, it's a low risk to come to market with and being moderately sure. And maybe you test in market, right? And it's okay to be wrong because it doesn't require much investment. So it just kind of depends on your degree of risk and how much you're willing to lose.
Yeah, I would add that it's the quality of the interview and the conversation that you're having with people. Yeah. You can ask open-ended questions, and you can probe and delve deeply into things, or you can ask really superficial questions and not get a lot of information. So I think it's the quality and the depth of the conversations that you're having with your potential customers.
And as a privately owned company, we do not start any heavy design of something like market ready until we see interest from the industry. So basically, for us, it is critical just to see, yes, definitely industry needs it. And also, it's also very critical for us because we are getting their input that helps us to maybe slightly modify that prototype, how we will build it, so that it will be more attractive for potential investors and for the industry.
So with all of this, do you really need to go out and talk to people, or can you just do this work online?
You have to go out and talk to people. I think it's going to validate what you can find out online. Yeah. You can find significant things online, but I think you really need to validate it in the field.
You are, as a researcher, are riddled with bias. That's what I'll say. You don't even know it's there. It's your job to figure out what your biases are. You're going to be positively biased towards your babies, always. You have incentive to want this to work, all right? So it's just like, to understand, I do too. I'm my own biggest liability. And in fact, sometimes when you know too much about research, you're even a bigger liability. You think like, oh, I got this, like I can take a shortcut, right? It's all a trap. So it's like grounding myself in a process. I'll tell you, like, what I like to do is try to actually put all my assumptions on paper and design a test for each one. That to me is the best way I can protect myself from myself, my own bias in this process. So just understanding that, like lean on the process. It's not something you can do in isolation. People don't think like you. I think it was a great comment about that Igor made about adoption. Like, you might correctly observe a need out there, a problem out there, and then you're like, great, you validated it, great. You validated it with 1,000 people, amazing, right? And then you go into your workshop and you build the product, and you're like ready to go to market. And then you launch it, and it's not the right presentation. It doesn't check the boxes for what the customer needs to adopt it into their lifestyle, or they're not interested. And it's a failure, even though you were right about the need. So, and that's happened probably 5 billion times in the history of humanity. Like, it's the most common story in the book. So, definitely.
And I will just tell that if you won't just limit yourself to online search, I mean, it's okay if you are okay that your fail ratio would be pretty high. If you want to reduce this risk, then online is a great tool because it will help you find right contacts, but then you have to have telephone conversation, maybe face-to-face meetings. You have to have contacts. Online is just a tool, nothing else.
I think another way to minimize that bias is to have multiple people involved in interviewing so that you have somebody else's perspective and what they've heard.
I love that comment because it is so true, because especially, going back to, you have assumptions and you have these biases, and so you are going to have that filter. You're just naturally going to have a filter, but when you have somebody else, then you're able to hear from that different perspective. I think the same is true, so I put up this little quote that I just love, as a poster that you can also buy, so don't believe everything you read on the internet just because there's a picture with a quote next to it, Abraham Lincoln. And I just love this because it really does show you that, you really do have to be careful when you're gathering this data, that you're not applying assumptions and biases and filters and accepting knowledge, but you are truly vetting and validating what is real. So. And I'll throw one more up here too. This is another one that I like a lot. People don't want a 1/4-inch drill, they want a 1/4-inch hole. So too, like when you're doing the customer discovery, as far as going back to that question of how much customer discovery do you do before you start building, and that's really driving down to what does the customer really need? What do they really want? Yes, your solution may be the answer to that, but really understanding what they need.
This is a great example of the difference between a job to be done and a product solution. And I think this I always show this too. It's like when and this is especially, I think, important for inventors. When you can understand the job to be done, then you give yourself as much room and territory to innovate within as possible, and that should be the goal. There are many ways to solve a problem. There are probably many ways to get a hole in a board, not just a drill. I mean, you can pound it with a hammer, you can, I don't know, the other way. So if anyone else here is an engineer, maybe you can tell me.
Igor could probably answer that.
You could, I don't know, split an atom, go a hole in it. I don't know. But to understand, I think it's so tempting to observe a need and then immediately go to product design. Here's how it needs to be solved. Well, wait a minute, let's take a couple steps back and understand all the different ways we could, what is the job to be done and what are all the ways we could solve the problem. And then you have suddenly room to move around and try different approaches. So.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Go ahead. So I would just add that with customer discovery, it cannot be too much. It can be only too little. And just remember that every dollar that you invest into customer discovery will give you a return of $100 that you will save later on. Every minute will save you hours.
Great point.
Yeah, I was going to add that when you're talking to folks, that you need to talk about what their problem is as opposed to what your solution is. So you need to ask them, for instance, think about the last time you did X and X. Tell me about it. And so the last time that you drilled a hole, what did you use? How did you do it? Where did you get the drill? And that's going to really help you figure out, is my solution something that they would use? You're learning about their experience as opposed to telling them what your product is, because they're going to likely say, that's a really cool idea, I'm going to buy that. When you really want honest, open answers and really authentic experiences of how they actually act in the world.
So I think that is a great segue kind of into our next set of questions. So we had a couple of them, such as an academic research, like what do I need to know and what should I expect and when I'm starting this customer discovery process? And even also like And does this customer discovery process really impact my innovation? So I'll let you.
If I could respond to that, I think the thing I see that most often is the ability to translate your invention into layperson speak, sort of explaining the elevator pitch, the 30-second description of what it is you're doing, because faculty tend to be experts and very deep into their field and very knowledgeable, and translating it to something like a 5-year-old could understand is a really difficult process, but something that's very valuable and is going to be beneficial in the customer discovery process.
I would just say I would recommend grounding yourself in a process. So get, Steve Blank has tons of videos on this. He developed this process. His book Talking to Humans. That's a very good tool. In fact, I think that's the book in the back of it that has the business assumptions exercise that I'm talking about. I love that exercise. That is the single most important exercise I could possibly stress for people to use, and that's where he starts you off with a whole list of questions. Those are all assumptions. Who's your customer? What's their problem? What are they using now to solve their problem? They are using something now. It might not look like your solution. It might not be a medical device. It might be something else. It might be something very mundane. You are technically in competition with that, and understanding that. It might be something that they use for free. That's not, innovation, but you're technically in competition with that, right? So, and then you'll list your own assumptions, and that will enable you then to have them on paper and test them, and then determine how much risk you want to bear, So I would definitely ground in that. I actually personally, I personally recommend not describing your product until you get to an MVP stage, and then really you're showing it to them. You're showing a representation of your product to the customer. That comes in stage 2, because it's just too slippery otherwise. It's just too slippery. And there are some exceptions to this. If you do show your product or talk about your product to a customer in an interview, maybe putting it at the end of the interview, you just don't want to prime someone. They're going to want to please you. That's what's happening, actually. That's their bias, right? There's bias for humans. It's bias all around. Everybody's biased. So, you have positive bias towards your stuff as a researcher. The people you're talking to, will want to please you, or they'll want to help you. And if they do, they aren't helping you because they're not being honest. You need to see you want the truth from them. And so, generally, I just recommend people just not, just do the tell me about the last time you had this problem. What did you use to try to solve it? How did that go? That's the kind of stuff you really want, and it's all exploratory, because it's that you want to find out what I don't know that I don't know. So
I will throw. There was an acronym that was used, MVP, so that's minimally viable product.
Sorry.
So
apologies.
No, just to translate. Well, when I first got here, there was all these acronyms. I'm like, I don't know what that is. So just to translate it the other way. And I think too. So I have a lot of experience similar to yours as far as consumer goods, which I do think is a little bit more straightforward versus the medical space, because there you're looking at your consumer, your customer is your consumer. But I think one thing to look at too is even understanding who is their customer in the health space, because it may or may not be the patient. It may be the doctor. It may be another person on the clinical staff. It may be the hospital. It may be the payer, in the insurance companies. And so even understanding the complexity of all of the customers, it may be all of them, as far as your solution, and looking at, all these various customers. You don't have just one, but you have multiple customers. So that definitely will play into it as well.
Yeah, and I think you might have the end user that's using it, but you got the person that's making the decision on buying it.
Correct.
And that's as important a person as the person that will be using it, perhaps even more so.
Yeah. I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
No, I'm not an academic researcher, so that's why I'm going to be quieter now.
Yeah. So I think the takeaway really is focusing on who makes the decision to use your solution, as Julie was saying, and who makes the decision to buy. Because they may be very different people in different groups, and really understanding both of them. And then this is also something that Annie brought up, is what jobs are your customers trying to do? So if you are looking at, a potential new diagnostic tool, well, how are people being diagnosed today? With what tools are available today, and how is your solution different? And so in really diving down into, okay, what are the needs? What is being done today by the clinicians? So really understanding their day-to-day flow without even talking about your potential solution, if it's in fact like a diagnostic, but really understanding what they're doing and then evaluating your solution against what you're hearing as far as their needs. Okay, so another question that we received from the audience is, what are the stages of product development and how does customer discovery validation different at each stage? I don't know if anybody wanted to tackle, that's kind of a big question there, but I don't know if anyone wanted to tackle that one.
I could talk about this actually at the Hershey Company if you want to hear just the.
Sure.
Yes, I mean, I know this is a different industry, so so let's change the gears for a second. So there was a pretty standardized process there. Where you have your marketing team that are the leads on the process, and then you have your R&D folks who are doing research on vegetable technology or whatever, and then you have your development scientists too. And the marketing folks would identify an opportunity out in the marketplace. It might be a new group of consumers that are under that we're under reaching, or it could be a new need that's developed through trends or in the marketplace, or maybe competition has created a new category of products. So, the opportunity is identified, and then we look and see. We work with R&D to see what capabilities do we have, and what do we have kind of in the pipeline of technologies that could fit this need, if anything, or do we have to develop something fresh? But from there, really, there's the MVP in this process. Well, okay, let me take a step back. So our R&D folks would do their research. Like in the ingredients, and they would create a formula. They would test it for safety, efficacy, whatever, basically prove out that the product works. And then we would test the concept. So this is how we did MVP at Hershey. We would create a rendering and a written description of the product. We'd identify the target customer, who our hypothesis target customer, and we put this paper concept in front of them and ask them to respond to it. Just watch them respond to it. What was drivers of liking, and there were different metrics we would decide to look at to indicate, like we're trying to figure out purchase intent, basically. What was the degree of purchase intent? From there, we would gather information from those consumers. We would take it back to the lab. We would iterate, update, optimize the product based on those learnings, and then we would do a final product market fit with a actual product test. We create real products and put it in front of the customer, and again, observe them. At this point, we've developed the product, so let them try it and get the feedback there and measure purchase intent. And that was kind of our process. And as I learned then, after I worked at the Hershey Company, as I learned the startup process, I could see that this overlaid with the process that we use at Hershey. There was an MVP that would inform the product design, and then there was a final actual product that was put in front of the customer that would again that information would come back and inform the design again before we went to market. So that's how we did it there. That's helpful.
No, it is very much so.
Yeah.
So thank you.
And I can just add a couple of words, basically, based on our experience, what we find like really important steps in this development when we get an invention. First of all, we want to make sure that it really works, because before we actually reach out and talk to industry experts or subject matter experts, we need to find out if it works. So that's why we need a functional prototype. So we don't care how it looks. We don't care that it can be totally different from how it will look later on, but we need these functional prototypes so that we could make sure that yes, it really works. As soon as we have a functional prototype, then, as basically told, we need to find out who is our audiences. And again, it can be different people. If you are talking about medical devices, we need to understand, are we talking to the doctor who may be just potential users, or we are talking to the company who can be a licensee for future needs, and basically this is what we are interested in the most. So when we can find out what or who should be our audience, then basically we talk to them. And after that, one very important step is regulations. We need to find out if this device, if you are talking about medical device, if it requires FDA approval or if it doesn't require. Because obviously, depending on this step, it will be totally different time, money, and different process. And only after that, we actually go to the next step when we actually talk to these people, talk to our potential customers, and then we will totally adjust how this product or prototype will look later on, basically what we talked before.
Thank you. I think that, so I'm going to put a pin in the word regulatory because I want to come back to that. Before I do, looking at this question that came from the audience, I really did like it, as far as the stages of product development and how does customer discovery fit. And I think it is something that you realize you have to be doing through the entire process. And there's a beautiful word that, you can incorporate. It's called the pivot. So the nice thing is as you are developing your minimally viable product and as you are building these prototypes and you're testing and validating, if you are starting to hear from that customer base, like, okay, yeah, no, yeah, I do have this need, but this isn't solving it, or, well, I thought this was my problem, but indeed, actually, this is my real problem. The nice thing is you're getting all of that information real time and you're able to pivot and adjust as far as your development. But I think, and especially in the medical space, understanding too the regulatory process, and I would even throw in the reimbursement process. You need to be, asking questions and meeting with reimbursement and payers and meeting with regulatory experts as well to make sure that you're not charging down a path that is going to miss the customer of the federal government, as far as being able to get it through the FDA process, or missing the fact that you were building a beautiful solution to a very clear need, but the payers would not pay for it. So baking in, those customers as well and those feedback is really critical. So thank you for.
And I will just add a couple of words about that because we actually saw one example just recently when we are talking to the doctor and they are talking about their invention and they know that they bill for a certain procedure over $500. The only thing that they didn't know that CPT code, Medicare CPT code pays for this procedure about $10. So it doesn't matter how much you bill, what is important, how much you get paid. And obviously you will face this issue later on because when potential investor will look at it, he doesn't care how much you bill for it. He cares how much he can get paid. And that's why it's also, as you told, it's very important. Reimbursement is very important.
Great example. So the other questions we received is like, okay, I get customer discovery and why it's important, but how do I know who to talk to and what do I say? But let's start with the first question is like, how do I know who to talk to?
So one of your hypotheses is who your customer is. So thinking about not everybody wants this product, but who specifically is this going to be most attractive to, making that hypothesis and then going out and finding those people. And there's a variety of different ways to find people that you have contacts with, certainly mind them, they'll introduce you. After every interview, ask them who else should I be talking to, they'll introduce you to other people as well. I think LinkedIn is a great place to go to. There's groups, there's individuals. You can put your question out there and connect to people that way as well. But finding those niches and then mining them as you go.
We actually, and it's often a recommendation to find the beachhead market. So to get really specific with the target customer as your hypothesis, and it's actually good practice to go narrow. The reason is because the way products are adopted is you have early adopters who evangelize for you and affect the mainstream population, and that it always happens that way. So it's actually good practice to isolate those early adopters and get specific with understanding the characteristics that define them, who they are. The need is one characteristic. There's one for you right there, and to talk to them. When you talk to them, like open-ended questions, or best practice. Again, one way to frame it is to if they're experiencing a problem or a need, to understand the larger process of where that problem and need is experienced, and then have them walk you through the process. Just tell me about the last time you blank, and that their need fell in the context of this larger, process. At the end of the process is the job to be done, basically, right? So you were trying to do X. Tell me what happened last time. What did you use to help you get there? Help you achieve that goal? How did it go? And I'll tell you, pain points are like red flags of opportunity, in general, because those basically give the user or the customer a reason to be interested in something else and another type of solution. And so those are golden opportunities to probe in, and if someone describes some frustration at a certain point in the process, you'd be able to tell me more about that and find out what the pain point is. And if you can improve upon it, do it. I mean, that's going to drive people to be interested in your solution. The other thing I guess I want to stress I find is important is understanding what the customer is currently using to solve their problem, because that's your competition. And getting people to switch is actually much, much harder than it seems. You may come in with a better product, and they may agree that the customer might agree it's a better product, but they still might not switch because switching takes work. And it sounds ridiculous, but it's true. People are set in their ways. They don't like change. There's an inherent feeling of risk when you're changing, especially if you have to pay a little bit more. You might come in with a better, cheaper product, but it needs to be better enough and cheaper enough to get them to switch. That's another assumption. Those are two assumptions for you to add to your list. What is enough? Where's the threshold? Where is enough for price, and where is enough for efficacy, or however you're better. So again, that adoption piece is much harder than it seems. So.
And I can just add, again, based on our experience, that this is an example where internet is great, because if you use cold calling, it's very difficult to go through gatekeepers to actually talk to someone, but using tools like LinkedIn, you can actually talk to a lot of people, and if you get their interest, they will be definitely talking to you.
I think another great avenue is through conferences or trade shows, where you're going to get that high concentration of people that are in your particular field. And you've got them wandering around, you can capture them quite easily. But it's very difficult to cold call and expect a lot of failure and rejection, and just keep plowing through and persevering.
Great answers. Just to recap that a little bit, and I'm going to go back to something Annie even said earlier. So, LinkedIn, I think conferences are great. We've actually seen our researchers, be able to do tremendous amount of customer discovery at conferences, like where they are interviewing 20 to 30 different individuals, at one single conference. So that, thanks for bringing that up, because those are a great area. Same way with LinkedIn. Then you're being able to go directly to an expert in the space to talk to. But Annie said something a little bit earlier about people want to help, and that is one thing we have found to be so true. Like, this is quite the scary process. It's like, oh my goodness, I don't know this person, and why are they going to take my call and actually even give me 15 to 20 minutes of their time? For the end of the day, most people do want to help other people, especially if you're trying to bring, a new solution, to impact patient care. They want to help you. And we had 2 cohorts ago, we had a customer discovery process, and we had one team, they're like, well, I'm calling the CEOs. And they were getting in-person interviews with CEO of pharma companies, which now these aren't the GSKs, but these are still good-sized companies that people are like, yeah, I'll talk to you, because this is a problem, and we would love that there's more people tackling it. And they were getting 20, 30-minute interviews with these powerful people, because at the end of the day, people do want to help. So it seems like a really scary thing to do, but once you get started, and I think the other comment was made, I think, Julie, you said, ask, who else should I be talking to? They will then open the doors, and they'll give you those warm introductions for the next 2-3 people to be talking to, and it really just starts to snowball. So all great points. Another thing, too, as far as, I wanted to throw this out there, because I think this is really a great thing. As far as like, what do you want to say? Really know your short story. Practice it. Practice. Like why you are needing to talk to them is also a really good thing.
I think being specific about the time limit that you're going to take, being concise, that it's 15 minutes to expect, and it's not an open-ended kind of time period.
Yeah, no, that's a great point too. Let's see, like I have one more here too. Also, some best practices for interviews. So there's a lot. Like I think we have mentioned one resources as far as talking to humans. We're going to give you some more resources at the end of this panel discussion. But here are just a couple of rules that I grabbed real quick that and as you can see, there's only 4 listed here. We're at rule 8. There's a lot more out there. But like just even some general rules of listening more than you talk. I think we've touched on a couple of these as far as, asking the why and asking when is the last time you have, just not would you like my solution, but really try to pull out their problem. And then, as Julie was saying, who else should I be talking to? So these are a couple other just best practices as far as the interviewing.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So someone on the panel mentioned this concept of a value proposition. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Thank you, Rita. So a value proposition is what sets you apart from everybody else. What's your secret sauce? What value do you bring and why?
Yeah, and it relates directly back to the need or the problem that you're solving. So it's the customer's perception of value. Sometimes we talk about the value proposition too as your total product package that it's coming to market. So it's not just the product, it's the pricing and the way it gets to it's the 4 Ps of marketing, if anything, particular marketing class. But it's the way it's presented to the customer. It's the channels the way it gets there. That will all of those choices should relate back to customer needs and desires, right? Including the price point that you pick and the way it gets to the customer. So it's not just the product necessarily.
Yeah, so and to piggyback off that question a little bit too, so with the value proposition, do you have that going into your customer discovery process, or does the customer discovery process help you generate that?
You discover it in the customer discovery process. Yeah, you discover.
I think you go in with a hypothesis about what your value proposition is, and more than likely it'll change as you go through the process.
And also, when you're talking about value proposition, basically you should look at 2 different components. One is direct value from the device state, for example, and another component is how much time, for example, doctor will save using a new device. So in a lot of cases, you don't look at it immediately, but for somebody who will be using it, sometimes it's even more important how much time and how easier it will be to use, let's say, a new device instead of an old device, especially if it reduces the amount of writing, up and charts and everything else.
So at this point, I would like whoever has a story or 2, is there any success stories that you could share of teams that you witnessed or were part of, or that you saw the customer discovery process really work? And so where did the team start and where did they finish?
So going back to the Calm, the device that the student developed to calm social anxiety, he started out in my office as a transfer student, gave me his pitch. It was completely confusing. I had no idea what he was talking about. And he entered a business plan competition, and he's a very earnest student, and he practiced and he practiced and he practiced. And his pitch became excellent, and he won the business plan competition. He went into an incubator where he did customer discovery. He did the pivot where he, changed his business delivery model to be a business to customer, and he's now in the prototyping stage and beta testing. He's received, he's built up his team, and he's followed every single rule. He's an Eagle Scout, by the way, but he followed every single rule, and it worked out for him really well. And it's not that he didn't have pivots and failures along the way, but he was really earnestly following the model and is doing great. He's got some initial investment, and will be going to market in a Fitbit kind of device with the long-term goal of going into clinical trials and getting it FDA approved.
And this was one that he initially went business to business, and he was told, no, there's nothing here.
Right.
Right, but then...
Well, there's a market there, but it's a longer market.
road.
So he wanted to go quicker into it and then develop it in a longer term.
Okay, wonderful. Go ahead, please.
Okay, well, unfortunately, I cannot say that all 100% of our project went into products, but yes, we do have a number of examples. When we started working with an idea, then idea went into prototype, and then actually a new company was formed and licensed technology, and right now is on during the next step, moving to the market. And there is one more thing that I wanted to add. Whenever you prepare or somebody prepares a pitch, you have to remember that it cannot be one pitch for everyone. Depending on who you talk to, it can be totally different pitch, because if you talk to, let's say, to the user, he would be much more interested in how easy would be to use the device, what benefits he will get. If you're talking to some executive, he doesn't need all the details. He doesn't care about them. He just wants to know what will be a value for him. And if he can see the value, he will set up the next meeting with technical people that will ask a lot of questions about technical details. But yes, we did have a number of these examples when it went from step one till basically almost to the last step right now.
I didn't know if you had any
Sure.
student examples.
Yeah. I was just thinking through. Oftentimes, what I'll see is someone will come in with an idea and think they're going to sell direct to consumers, and this is where it's really complicated. It takes a ton of research because in order to, you're on the hook for attracting maybe up to millions of purchases, right? But just like to the general population. So it's a nightmare to measure, and it's a nightmare to research, and it's hard. But their initial thought is like, this is for the general public. And through the process of customer discovery, they'll find out that actually business to business is a better way to go. And for a business to incorporate this value into their total value proposition to better attract their customers. And that's just so much more efficient in so many ways. But oftentimes I'll see a transition from B2C, as we say, to B2B through the process of customer discovery. They'll discover businesses who have needs that they can fit with this capability that they're trying to build into a product. So specific examples of financial products someone built recently, the predictive financial product. It's for consumers to use. Thought that people would just download it and use it and buy it, and meanwhile there are billions of apps out there. The competition's hard, but it was better suited for like a credit union to buy and offer it as additional value for their customers, up their sort of competitive advantage, against other banks. So that came out of a process of customer discovery.
Great example. How about failures?
Too many to count.
I have one all queued up. We want to go to that one, more famous one. But I know if we had any more local homegrown failures.
We get some quirky ideas that come in through our doors. And one I was telling you earlier is a gentleman had patented his idea for a swiveling toilet seat. So he liked to sit on the toilet and swivel to get his magazines. You have not seen that on the market, I don't think. Yeah, no, that was a failure.
But to that point, though, it would be interesting to know how many thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars he spent to actually obtain that patent on this idea that he thought he was going to be able to market, when really he may be the only person who had that need.
Yeah.
We had encouraged him to do customer discovery many times, and he was convinced it was the best idea and never did it, and it's the result.
Yeah. I don't know if you had
unfortunately, yeah, you do. And again, even if you look at everything and you think that you already thought about everything, there is something else that will come up. So, and if you're talking about failures, there are two types of failure. One, when basically nobody needs it, and another one, yes, we don't need it this way, but if you can change it a little bit this way, then it'll be a totally different story. And obviously, this is an example that will show that if customer discovery was done better before, probably you would get this input earlier, and you would save time and money.
Well, I'm going to show everyone kind of a more famous one, just to kind of send this message home. So I'm sure everybody has been familiar with the Segway here. Well, to let you know, back in 2001, they actually raised over $100 million to develop the Segway. And they told their investors that it was projected to reach over 10,000 units per week in sales.
So that is per week. They were going to sell 10,000 of these things each week. And this was going to revolutionize the way people moved around, especially in cities. Fast forward, at the end of 2 years, they only sold 6,000 total, not 10,000 per week. And because the one thing is they did not take into account the complexity of the customer's ecosystem. They never really went out and talked to the customers as, do you need this? Is this how you want to get around? Is this something that, it works for you? They didn't understand the job from the customer's perspective. So what we really ended up with is this. So this is really why customer discovery is so important, because $100 million is a lot of money. So there are a lot of resources out there. It was something that we brought up before, and one of the questions that we got was, well, what resources are out and available to help me really learn the customer discovery process? I think, Annie, you brought up Steve Blank before. Just even going out and Googling Steve Blank customer discovery, there are tons of YouTube videos out there with Steve Blank that you can listen to. There's also some wonderful books. So we talked about value proposition. So there's actually a very nice, simple book about value proposition design. Also this lean startup method. So these are some of the great resources that are available. Oh, we can see over you. That's no problem.
There's also a good book called Switch. It's also out of Stanford.
Okay.
Talking about the difficulties of getting people to change their patterns.
That's a good one. That is one I've not heard of, and that goes back to what you were talking about as far as adoption. So thank you. So we'll add Switch.
And a lot of the Steve Blank videos are maybe 2 minutes long, which is great. And he even has examples in customer discovery interviews. So you can watch them and you can figure out, like, did that work? Was that a good or bad interview? Really, really helpful. Easy to consume.
And then just to share with you too, here at Penn State, we do offer an I-Core regional short course training. We have our next one will be in October, November, where we actually teach you all the customer discovery value proposition methodology and how to do it. And it's about a 4-week course to walk you through. But I know at all of our respective institutions, we have training and resources available, so you can reach out to them. A lot of times it's within your commercialization office or within your tech transfer teams. To reach out to see what kind of support systems there are to actually conduct customer discovery. Because we are seeing the NIH more and more, require this as far as grant opportunities. So at this point in time, though, I would love to open it up to the floor if there's any additional questions before we conclude our panel.
I'm wondering how the initial process of trying to think about your product. You walk in the door. How do you go about pulling out the concept that they're looking to develop? If there's I have an idea for a new food vending machine or a new, so is there some methodologies that we can bring back to our office if we're in the tech transfer space that we can use to get people to sort of help define what it is they're doing, or what they're interested in doing?
Stay grounded in the user need or the problem. I have an idea I've observed a problem. Okay, but I know how it goes, right? This is if you're a purist, you start with the user, right? But most of us are inventors, right? And we'll come up with a product idea. We have the capability we're good at. I'm a great baker. I'm not a great baker, but if I were, I'm a terrible baker actually. But I'm a mean cupcake. No, that's too ubiquitous. But some, let's say I'm an inventor of something, and I'm like, I really like for some kind of product application for my invention. But I need to actually, so yeah, I'm here in the process now. I have maybe even a prototype, maybe I have a basic product design, but I need to go back and do the process from the beginning. And this is really, really hard when you have a prototype. This is why I'm really hesitant to work with people with prototypes, because I'm like, you are going to be attached to the prototype. Everything in you subconsciously is going to resist changing. So you need to, as much as you can, just pretend it doesn't exist yet, the prototype, and start fresh with a beginner's mind, and understanding the user need, all the component, understanding like the 360 view of the user problem or the need, and understanding the full job to be done, so that you can, again, you have multiple options to solve that customer problem, but to ground yourself in that versus like your product, you know what I mean? Yeah, so that's what I would recommend.
Yeah, we use the Socratic method, so we never tell somebody their idea is really good or it's really bad. We really help them determine that path by asking a lot of questions, and sort of help guide them through those questions and helping them make those decisions.
And just, I think to go back to provide an example that we had here is we actually had a gastroenterologist who came in with an invention. She wasn't at the prototype stage yet, but she wanted to develop an over-the-counter diagnostic that you could buy at your local pharmacy to diagnose your belly pain. Because what she was seeing is that, patients were calling at all hours of the evening, that they had this undescribed belly pain and they were panicked. They were worried. Their kids had it, they had it, they wanted to know why they had belly pain. So she thought, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if patients could just go to their local CVS or Walgreens or wherever pharmacy and be able to buy a little kit so they could do a swab and determine what's causing their belly pain. Do they have a bacteria infection? Are they just gassy? Did they eat something they shouldn't have eaten? Or is there something really serious going on? So she started this customer discovery process. So she put her solution aside and she just went out and started asking moms, dads, kids, single people, old people, young people, all kinds of people about, do you get belly pain? What do you do when you get belly pain? Would you, what other solution would you like to understand your belly pain? And what she ended up finding, person after person after person, nobody wanted a diagnostic device that they could buy at a pharmacy to diagnose their belly pain. Because people kind of lumped into several different categories. And she interviewed like over 100 people. And so in the grand schemes, that's not a lot, but for 4 weeks, 100 people was a lot. But nobody wanted to go to, to do an at-home test to find out what's going on with their belly pain. Because they were like, the people fell into two camps. One, I have belly pain, I'm probably just gassy, it will go away. And they're not gonna worry about it. Or you're gonna have the other type of person is, I have belly pain, oh my goodness, this is bad, I'm calling my doctor. Regardless, like even if some other test they took, they wanna call their doctor. And that's really what that she found is that this is the customer and this was the patients that they're not going to switch. They're not going to switch from what they do. They're either not going to worry about it or they're going to worry about it. And so she abandoned her idea because she realized this was full story. What she actually realized was the real problem was she wanted to stop having people call at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning about belly pain. But what she found out is those people are going to call regardless of what tools were available to them because they would not stop until they talked to the doctor. Yes.
Maybe the solution would have been established a call center.
Yeah, no, that is great.
Getting a better answering machine.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that would have been a good pivot. Yes. Yeah, like, okay, so these people are going to call in, so what is the solution to address that? Yes. So, but it was interesting because when she first came to us, we were like, oh, we all thought it was a good idea. There's nothing like that on the market. But through the customer discovery process, we found out a lot about people that have belly pain and what they do. So thank you for your question. Are there any other questions?
But call center, in this case, would be like this, whatever, device or something. If somebody doesn't care, he will not call center. If somebody really cares about his health, he will call call center and then say, okay, but can you ask my doctor to actually call me? So.
But I think that, in defining what the need was, I think she was looking at the need for herself.
Yes. Yeah, no, I think you both said it beautifully. Yeah, she was the customer she was trying to have the solution for. Yeah.
We do have surgeons who are commonly coming in with inventions, and we often find those to be pretty practical because they're actually dealing with the problem they're trying to solve. They don't always understand what the costs will, what the limits to reimbursement will be for the space. But if you can make a cogent argument, or they can make a cogent argument, we'll explore that. So.
I think that is a very good point. And just in case it didn't get picked up on the mic, I was talking about how surgeons, they are living with that clinical unmet need. And so a lot of times they do really have a great problem that needs solved. But then looking at the other elements as far as the customer discovery process as reimbursement and regulatory, understanding how products get into hospitals and get adopted into hospitals. So, customer discovery still serves a really great place for there, even though they are looking at a solution, they already know who the end user is going to be.
What's that? Necessity.
Yes, necessities and other interventions.
So the idea of cold calling or maybe walking up to random people at trade shows might be a little scary. Do you guys have any tips that you would share to maybe some extreme introverts that don't want to just put themselves out there?
Going with somebody who's an extrovert. So having tag teaming it, number one, you have a buddy with you, so that makes it less intimidating. I think the more you do it, the easier it gets. So practicing, maybe practice with somebody you feel comfortable with first. Having your sort of spiel down makes it less. Having other people introduce you to somebody also sort of takes away some of the intimidation. But I think practicing and just doing it will make you more comfortable. And you're passionate about your product. And so I think that also emboldens you when you're talking about your baby.
And also, if you do cold calling, you should know as much as possible about this company and that person before. So it doesn't mean that if you have a telephone number, you can just immediately call. You should still do some research on internet so that you could start talking about something that will put you separately from other people who do cold calling.
Yeah, what I tell our students all the time is go on LinkedIn and Google everybody who's a Temple grad in your field. And then go in with that connection saying, I'm a Temple student, would you have 5 minutes to talk to me about my idea? And typically that's effective too. So I think that's a great point to find a connection through Google or LinkedIn.
I think some other things to put out real quick too is that when you're talking to them, just put right up front, I'm not here to sell you anything. You are an industry expert, and I really just would like to glean some, guidance from you. So a little bit of flattery, make sure they know you're not trying to sell them anything. So, question that.
I was to a program sponsored here, and there was an outsider who was an attorney that served as a business for new ideas. Kind of like, I guess, what you're doing, but it's one.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, it's just, yeah. Yeah, I think too is building out a team, so that you're not alone, and, having people that have done it before as well also is very beneficial, that they're familiar how to do customer discovery. And that then addresses some of the assumptions and the biases, the other thing too, because they're aware of them and they know how to mitigate them.
And if you can participate in the I-Corps program that forces you to do that, and it gives you the tools, and sometimes just making you do it, you get it done, and then you have that practice, and you are able to do it easier the next time.
I second that. Forcing yourself to get through as much as you can, as quickly as you can. The I-Corps is beautiful, and it works perfectly for that. It's a great program.
And also, if you do, for example, cold calling, again, based on our experience, do not prepare some, pitch that you are telling all the time, because you have to listen to the person on the other end. Because we actually had experience when we had somebody who wanted to actually have like a flow chart. If I answer this, I'm telling this. If I answer that, I'm telling that. Then something a little bit different, and he's done. And he doesn't know what to say. So that's why you have to actually listen to that other side and then basically adjust what you say depending on what you hear.
And I think, Annie, you brought up some points earlier about that's when, if you just let this happen organically, you're going to find then pain points that you may not have even realized. And those will be opportunities for you as far as when you're developing, the solutions to address the problem. Because now you're hearing all of the struggles, not just maybe the one you thought was real, but maybe there's actually 4 issues. And now how can you adapt your product or your solution to address that the entirety of the struggles. Any other final questions? All right. With that, again, I would like to do a special thank you to our sponsor, MVM Associates, and also our host, Penn State College of Medicine. And if anybody wants to learn more about BioStrategy Partners and what we do, you can go to our website at biostrategypartners.org, or you can connect with us at LinkedIn at BioStrategy Partners. So thank you so much.